"You're not allowed in this house anymore," my daughter-in-law said as she set her wine glass down beside my late husband's favorite chair. The room went so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Slow, heavy, unforgiving. For a second I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. Maybe grief had distorted the words. Maybe my mind was still trapped somewhere between the funeral home and the cemetery from 6 days earlier. But then Vanessa folded her arms across her ivory sweater and looked directly at me with that tight little smile she used whenever she wanted to sound polite while being cruel. "Daniel and I need space," she continued. "And honestly, Evelyn, it's time for you to move on." Daniel sat beside her at the dining table, staring down at his untouched pot roast. My son wouldn't even look at me. The same boy who used to run into my arms after Little League games now looked at his dinner plate like it held the answers to his entire life. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. The candles I'd lit before dinner flickered between us, casting strange shadows across the walls Harold and I had painted together almost 20 years ago. Everything in that room carried his fingerprints. The oak cabinets, the brass light fixture, the small crack in the molding near the pantry door that he always promised to fix. 1 week earlier, I had buried my husband of 42 years. And now his son was letting me be thrown out of the only home I had left. "I'm not asking for much," Vanessa said with a sigh that sounded rehearsed. "There are beautiful senior apartments 15 minutes away. You'd actually have people your own age around." My own age. The word stung more than I expected. I looked at Daniel again, waiting for him to say something. Anything. But he only rubbed his jaw and muttered, "Maybe this is what Dad would have wanted, Mom." That was the moment something inside me turned cold. Not shattered. Not broken, just cold. Harold would never have allowed this. Never. I slowly folded my napkin beside my plate and stood up from the table. Vanessa watched me carefully, almost disappointed that I wasn't crying. "Fine," I said quietly. "If that's what you both want." I walked upstairs without another word. Halfway down the hallway, I noticed something strange. The framed family portrait that had always hung near the staircase was gone. So were Harold's fishing photos from the den. My chest tightened. They hadn't just decided this tonight. They'd already started erasing me from the house before they ever said a word. Inside my bedroom, I closed the door softly and sat on the edge of the bed. Harold's gray cardigan still hung on the chair near the window. His reading glasses still rested on the nightstand beside his Bible. The air still carried the faint scent of cedarwood aftershave. I pressed my trembling hand against my mouth and stared across the room until my eyes landed on the old brass key hidden beneath Harold's desk lamp. The key he once told me never to lose, especially if anything ever happened to him. I barely slept that night. Every time the house creaked, I opened my eyes expecting to hear Harold's footsteps coming down the hallway the way he always did around 3 in the morning whenever he could not sleep. For 42 years, there had always been another heartbeat somewhere inside these walls besides my own. Now the silence felt endless, heavy enough to press against my chest. Pale morning light slipped through the bedroom curtains as I sat at the edge of the bed still wearing yesterday's clothes. Downstairs, cabinet doors opened and closed. Vanessa was already awake. I could hear her moving around the kitchen with the confidence of someone rearranging a place she already considered hers. I reached for Harold's brass key again, turning it slowly between my fingers. The metal felt cold against my skin. Back then, I never asked many questions about it. Harold had simply placed it in my hand one rainy November evening and said, "If anything ever changes around here, you will know when to use it." At the time, I laughed and told him he sounded dramatic. Now I wished I had listened more carefully. I finally stood up and walked downstairs. The smell of expensive vanilla coffee creamer filled the kitchen. Vanessa had hated my plain black coffee for years. Too bitter, she always said. She was standing at the counter scrolling through her phone while sunlight poured across the marble island Harold installed himself the summer before he retired. Daniel sat quietly near the window in wrinkled work clothes, staring into his coffee mug. Neither of them noticed me at first. "The contractor can probably start next month," Vanessa said casually. "We should open up the dining room completely. The space feels old." My stomach tightened. Old. That dining room had hosted every Thanksgiving, every Christmas morning, every birthday cake with crooked candles our family ever shared. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Maybe we should wait a little while. Vanessa sighed loudly. Daniel, we have to think ahead. We cannot keep living like this forever. Living like this. As if Harold's death had become some inconvenient delay in their future plans. I quietly opened the refrigerator and noticed half of my groceries were gone. The homemade chicken salad I made 2 days earlier had disappeared. So had the lemon pie from the church ladies after the funeral. In their place sat neat rows of meal prep containers labeled with Vanessa's handwriting. Suddenly this did not feel like my kitchen anymore. Oh, Vanessa said when she finally looked up. I forgot to mention. I boxed up some of Harold's old things from the den. I thought it would help you move forward. For a moment I could not breathe. You what? She leaned against the counter, completely calm. Daniel agreed it was time. The room was depressing. I turned toward my son so quickly my knee struck the cabinet. You let her touch his things? Daniel finally looked at me, exhausted and uncomfortable. Mom. We are just trying to help. Help. That word echoed in my mind all morning long. By noon, rain clouds had rolled over the neighborhood again, darkening the windows. I walked into the garage searching for one of Harold's old toolboxes when I noticed something shoved against the far wall beneath a blue tarp. My name was written across several cardboard boxes in thick black marker. Evelyn. Donation. Winter clothes. Bathroom items. Family photos. I slowly pulled back the tarp. Farther. And my heart nearly stopped. Folded neatly beside the boxes sat my suitcase. I stood in that garage for what felt like an hour, staring at the boxes lined against the wall like evidence in a trial nobody had warned me about. The rain outside had started again, soft at first, then heavier against the roof overhead. My suitcase was the old navy blue Samsonite Harold bought for me before our trip to Maine 10 years earlier. Vanessa had even tied one of my floral scarves around the handle, as if she were preparing a thoughtful little gift instead of planning my removal from the house. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid on the nearest box. Inside were framed photographs from my bedroom dresser. My wedding picture. Daniel's second grade school portrait. A faded snapshot of Harold holding a trout beside Lake Michigan, smiling beneath a baseball cap stained with sweat and sunscreen. She had packed pieces of my entire life like they were clutter waiting for donation pickup. I suddenly heard the back door open upstairs. Footsteps crossed the kitchen floor above me. Quickly, I lowered the tarp again and stepped behind Harold's old workbench, just as Vanessa entered the garage carrying 2 empty storage bins. She froze when she saw me standing there. For the first time since the funeral, her polished confidence slipped for half a second. Oh, she said carefully. I did not realize you were down here. I looked at the bins in her hands. Apparently not. The silence between us felt sharp enough to cut through glass. Vanessa set the bins down slowly and brushed a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. I was only trying to organize things. The house has become overwhelming for everybody. Everybody. Not once had she said my name. Not once had she spoken to me like I was still part of the family living here. I glanced toward the boxes again. You packed my suitcase. She let out a long breath, almost annoyed that I had forced her into the conversation earlier than planned. Evelyn, this does not have to be dramatic. Dramatic. That word settled into my chest like ice. Harold had been gone exactly 8 days. 8. I folded my arms tightly to stop my hands from shaking. Did Daniel know about this? Vanessa hesitated just long enough to give me my answer. Daniel wants what is best for everyone. Which meant yes. Of course he knew. A car door slammed in the driveway a moment later. Daniel's footsteps entered through the mudroom, heavy and tired. He stopped the second he saw us standing across from each other in the garage. His eyes flickered toward the tarp, then toward my suitcase. Guilt spread across his face so fast it almost made me pity him. Almost. Mom, he started quietly. We were going to talk to you together. I stared at my son for several seconds without speaking. There was still sawdust on the garage floor from the shelves Harold built last spring. The smell of cedar wood still lingered in the air. Everything around me carried traces of the man who had spent his entire life protecting this family, while the 2 people standing in front of me were already dividing up what remained after his death. How long? I finally asked. Daniel blinked. What? How long have you both been planning this? Neither of them answered immediately. And in silence, people often tell the truth better than words ever could. Vanessa crossed her arms again and looked away first. That was when I knew this had started long before Harold's funeral, maybe even before he died. Daniel rubbed his forehead like a man exhausted by inconvenience rather than ashamed of betrayal. Mom, you cannot stay angry forever. Angry? I almost laughed. I was not angry anymore. I was beginning to understand something much worse. That evening, the house felt colder than usual. Not because of the rain outside, but because I finally understood I was living among people who had already decided my future without me. Vanessa stayed upstairs most of the night talking on the phone in low whispers, while Daniel sat in the living room pretending to watch television. Every few minutes he glanced toward me, then quickly looked away whenever our eyes almost met. Guilt has a strange smell to it. Heavy, nervous, restless. I could feel it filling the room more than the scent of the cedar logs burning in the fireplace. Around 10 o'clock, Daniel finally muted the television. Mom, he said carefully, nobody is trying to hurt you. I kept folding laundry without looking up. One of Harold's flannel shirts rested across my lap, still soft from years of washing. Then why does it feel like I am being erased? Daniel sighed deeply. Vanessa just thinks the house is too much for you now. Vanessa thinks a lot of things. My voice stayed calm, but something in my tone made him shift uncomfortably on the couch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain streaked down the front windows in silver lines while the grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. I used to love that sound. Harold bought the clock from an antique store during our 10th anniversary trip to Vermont. We barely had enough money for groceries back then, but he saw me admiring it and somehow found a way to bring it home anyway. That was Harold. Quiet gestures. Quiet loyalty. He spent 42 years building a life brick by brick without ever making me feel like a burden inside it. I suddenly remembered one winter nearly 15 years earlier when Daniel lost his first job after the recession. He and Vanessa had nowhere to go. Their apartment lease had ended. Their savings were almost gone. Harold cleared out the entire upstairs guest wing himself so they could move in comfortably. Family helps family, he told me while carrying boxes through the snowstorm outside. Vanessa cried when we handed them the spare house key back then. She hugged me tightly in this very kitchen and promised, I will never forget what you both did for us. Funny how quickly gratitude disappears once people begin imagining ownership. I folded Harold's shirt more carefully and stood up slowly. Did your father know? I asked quietly. Daniel frowned. Know what? That this was coming. His face tightened instantly. That alone answered half my question. Harold had always noticed things long before anybody else did. The silences. The resentment. The entitlement growing slowly beneath polite smiles. Suddenly I thought about the brass key upstairs again. My heart began beating harder. Without another word, I carried the laundry basket back to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. The storm outside had grown louder now, wind rattling the old maple branches against the windows. I walked toward Harold's desk and opened the bottom drawer where I had hidden the key earlier that morning. My hands felt strangely steady now. Beneath the desk sat a small oak cabinet built directly into the wall decades ago. Most people assumed it was decorative because there was no visible handle anywhere along the wood paneling. Harold once joked that it was his stubborn old man hiding place. At the time I thought he meant fishing magazines or emergency cash. But as I slid the brass key carefully into a narrow opening hidden beneath the shelf, I heard a soft metallic click somewhere inside the wall. And suddenly, the cabinet door slowly opened. Inside the hidden cabinet sat 3 thick folders, a small fireproof lockbox, and a single white envelope with my name written across the front in Harold's careful handwriting. For several seconds I simply stared at it while thunder rolled faintly outside the house. My chest tightened so hard it almost hurt to breathe. Harold had prepared this. Somehow he had known there might come a day when I would need answers after he was gone. Slowly, I sat down at the desk and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper inside smelled faintly of cedar and old ink. Evelyn, the letter began. If you are reading this, then things in this house have changed exactly the way I feared they would. Tears filled my eyes immediately, but I forced myself to keep reading. Harold wrote about Daniel first. Not with anger, but disappointment. He said our son had spent years trying too hard to please whoever stood closest to him, even if it meant ignoring what was right in front of him. Then came Vanessa. Harold never insulted her directly. That was not the kind of man he was. But between every line, I could feel his concern growing sharper. Some people slowly mistake generosity for weakness, he wrote. And once they believe a home belongs to them emotionally, they start reaching for it legally. I pressed my hand against my mouth. Harold knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Beneath the letter sat a leather folder stamped with the name of a law office downtown. I opened it carefully and found copies of trust documents, property records, and several pages covered in legal notes highlighted in yellow. My eyes moved across the words slowly at first, then faster. The house was not in Daniel's name. It had never been transferred after Harold's death the way Vanessa clearly believed. Instead, the property had been placed into a protected family trust almost 3 years earlier. And according to the documents in front of me, I was the sole controller of everything connected to it. My pulse pounded loudly in my ears. There was more. Attached to the final page was a handwritten note from Harold. If anybody ever pressures you to leave this home against your wishes, contact Rebecca Sloan immediately before signing anything. Rebecca Sloan. I had not heard that name in years. Harold's old attorney. I remembered her now. Silver hair, sharp eyes, calm voice. She handled the paperwork when Harold sold his construction company before retirement. Suddenly another memory surfaced. About 2 summers ago, Harold and Rebecca spent almost 3 hours talking privately in the backyard while Daniel and Vanessa were inside arguing about renovation plans for the kitchen. At the time, Harold simply told me they were discussing taxes. Now I wondered how much he had truly seen back then. Downstairs, I heard footsteps moving through the hallway. Vanessa's voice floated upward faintly, irritated about something in the kitchen. I quickly slid the papers back into the folder and wiped my eyes. For the first time in over a week, my fear began changing into something steadier, colder, clearer. They thought grief had made me fragile. They thought loneliness would make me obedient. But sitting there beneath the soft desk lamp Harold once used every night before bed, holding the truth in my hands, I realized something important. They had already packed my suitcase before understanding whose house they were actually standing in. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen windows for the first time in days, warm and golden against the marble countertops. Vanessa stood near the stove wearing cream-colored workout clothes, humming softly while scrolling through furniture listings on her tablet. If someone walked into the house at that moment, they would have thought she was a woman peacefully planning her future, not someone quietly preparing to remove her husband's grieving mother from her own home. Daniel had already left for work. His coffee mug still sat half full beside the sink, leaving a pale ring against the granite. I moved through the kitchen slowly, calm enough now to surprise even myself. "Good morning," I said. Vanessa glanced up briefly. "Morning." Her eyes narrowed slightly as if my composure unsettled her. She expected tears by now. Maybe pleading. Maybe anger. Instead, I opened the cabinet and reached for Harold's favorite coffee cup. The dark green ceramic one with the small chip near the handle. For 42 years I made his coffee before he even walked downstairs. Some habits settle into your bones so deeply they survive grief itself. Vanessa watched me carefully over the rim of her smoothie glass. "I found a few retirement communities online," she said casually. "There is one about 20 minutes away with walking trails and group activities." I poured the coffee slowly. "That sounds lovely." She blinked. "You agree?" I almost smiled. At my age, peace sounds more valuable than arguing. Her shoulders relaxed instantly. For the first time in over a week, I saw relief spread across her face. Not compassion, relief. Like someone finally seeing the last obstacle begin to move out of the way. "I knew you would understand eventually," she said. Understand. Such a gentle word for betrayal. I carried my coffee into the dining room where Harold's old leather chair still faced the backyard windows. Outside, the maple trees swayed softly beneath the clear blue sky while squirrels darted across the fence Harold rebuilt by hand after a storm 3 summers ago. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of him. Not money. Not ownership. Work. Loyalty. Years. Vanessa entered the dining room a few minutes later carrying a folder. Actually, she said brightly, there are a couple things we should probably organize early. She slid the folder onto the table in front of me. Apartment brochures. Storage options. A moving company estimate. My eyes paused on the final page. A floor sketch of the downstairs renovation plans. Master suite expansion. Wine wall installation. Demolition of Harold's study. I looked up slowly. You have been busy. Vanessa gave a tight laugh. Well, Daniel and I figured if we are staying long-term, we should make the house feel more modern. Staying long-term. The confidence in her voice almost fascinated me now. She truly believed the future had already been decided. I closed the folder gently and folded my hands across it. You know, I said quietly, Harold always believed people reveal themselves most clearly when they think nobody can stop them. Vanessa's smile flickered for just a second. Then she straightened her shoulders again. I am only trying to do what is best for this family. Family. That word sounded smaller every time she used it. I took another sip of coffee while studying her carefully. The expensive jewelry. The polished nails. The calm performance she wore like armor. She thought control belonged to whoever spoke the loudest, planned the fastest, pushed the hardest. But Harold understood something different. Real power stayed quiet until the exact moment it needed to speak. And later that afternoon, after Vanessa left for her salon appointment, I finally picked up the phone and called Rebecca Sloan. Rebecca Sloan arrived the following morning just after 9 o'clock. The sky outside was pale gray again, and a thin layer of fog still clung to the front lawns across the neighborhood. I watched her silver sedan pull slowly into the driveway while Vanessa stood in the kitchen arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase like she was preparing for a magazine photo shoot. Instead of a legal conversation, she did not yet know would change everything. Rebecca stepped through the front door wearing a charcoal coat and carrying a leather briefcase tucked beneath one arm. Time had added silver to her hair and fine lines around her eyes, but her expression remained sharp and steady exactly as I remembered. Vanessa appeared confused the second she saw her. Can I help you? She asked politely. Rebecca removed her gloves calmly. I am here to see Evelyn Carter. The way she said my full name made something shift instantly inside the room. Vanessa glanced toward me, then forced a smile. Oh, of course. I did not realize Evelyn was expecting company. Rebecca looked directly at her. Most people do not expect attorneys unless there is a reason. Silence settled over the kitchen so quickly it almost felt physical. Daniel came downstairs a moment later fastening the buttons on his shirt for work. The second he saw Rebecca standing beside the dining table, all the color drained from his face. Rebecca, he asked slowly, what are you doing here? She placed her briefcase carefully on the table Harold built with his own hands almost 30 years earlier. Cleaning up unfinished business your father prepared before his death. Vanessa's posture stiffened immediately. What unfinished business? Rebecca ignored the question at first and turned toward me instead. Evelyn, would you like me to proceed now? I nodded once. Calmly. Quietly. The same way Harold always handled difficult things. Rebecca opened the briefcase and removed several folders. The soft sound of paper sliding across wood suddenly seemed louder than the rain beginning outside again. Daniel stared at the documents without blinking. Vanessa folded her arms tightly across her chest. I do not understand what is happening, she said. Rebecca finally looked at her directly. That is because you made assumptions before understanding the legal structure of this property. Vanessa gave a short nervous laugh. The house belongs to Daniel now. Harold made that very clear. No, Rebecca replied evenly. He did not. The room went completely still. Daniel slowly lowered himself into a chair like his knees had stopped working properly. Rebecca opened the trust documents and slid them across the table toward him. 3 years ago, Harold Carter transferred the property and all connected assets into a protected family trust under Evelyn's sole control. Vanessa blinked twice. That cannot be right. Rebecca's expression never changed. It is entirely right. I watched Vanessa's confidence begin cracking in real time. Small things first. Her jaw tightening. Her fingers gripping her elbows harder. The tiny flicker of panic she tried desperately to hide behind polished composure. Daniel looked up at me slowly, stunned. Mom, you knew. I held his gaze for several seconds before answering. Not until recently. Vanessa stepped forward abruptly. There has to be some mistake. Daniel is Harold's son. Rebecca closed the folder calmly. And Evelyn is Harold's wife. The trust specifically states that any attempt to pressure or remove her from the residence against her wishes immediately revokes future occupancy rights for all secondary beneficiaries. Vanessa's face went pale so fast it almost startled me. Occupancy rights? Rebecca nodded once. Which means neither of you has legal authority to remain in this house if Evelyn decides otherwise. For the first time since Harold died, Vanessa had absolutely nothing to say. The house changed after that morning. Not loudly. Not all at once. But in small careful ways that felt impossible to ignore. Vanessa barely spoke during the rest of the day. She moved through the room stiffly, opening cabinets too hard, shutting drawers too fast, pretending not to notice me while watching everything I did from the corner of her eye. Daniel looked worse. He wandered through the house like a man suddenly waking from a long dream he no longer understood. Twice, I caught him standing alone in Harold's study staring at the old woodworking tools hanging along the wall. By evening, the rain had stopped and a cold orange sunset spilled through the backyard windows. I was sitting on the porch wrapped in Harold's gray cardigan when Daniel quietly stepped outside holding 2 mugs of coffee. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to sit beside me after thunderstorms because loud weather frightened him. He handed me a mug carefully and lowered himself into the chair across from mine. "Mom," he said softly, "why would Dad do this?" I looked out toward the maple trees swaying gently in the fading light. "Because your father noticed things." Daniel rubbed his hands together. Nervously. "You make it sound like we were plotting against you." I finally looked at him then. Really looked at him. The dark circles beneath his eyes. The shame he kept trying to hide behind confusion. "Were you not?" He opened his mouth immediately, then closed it again. Silence answered for him. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked while porch lights flickered on one by one across the neighborhood. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary evening. Yet nothing inside this house felt ordinary anymore. Daniel stared into his coffee mug for several seconds before speaking again. "Vanessa thought you would eventually want to downsize anyway. Vanessa already packed my suitcase." His face tightened instantly. "I did not know she actually did that. But you knew she planned to remove me." Daniel leaned back heavily in the chair and covered his eyes with one hand. "I do not know what happened," he whispered. "Everything got complicated after Dad got sick. No, Harold's illness did not create this. It only revealed it. I understood that now. Grief has a way of exposing people faster than comfort ever does." The porch door suddenly opened behind us. Vanessa stepped outside wearing a cream sweater and tight expression, her phone clenched in one hand. "Daniel, can we talk inside?" she asked sharply. He looked exhausted already. "About what?" "About the fact that your mother is turning this into a legal circus." I stayed quiet while Vanessa crossed her arms and continued speaking faster now, her composure beginning to crack. "We have lived here for years. We helped maintain this property. We planned our future here." Future. Again that word. Always spoken like ownership. Daniel stood slowly. "Vanessa." "No," she snapped. "Your father manipulated this entire situation." That sentence changed everything. The air itself seemed to stop moving. I rose carefully from my chair and faced her fully for the first time since Harold's funeral. "Do not speak about my husband that way in the home he spent his life building." Vanessa's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the firmness in my voice. Then anger replaced the shock. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You are acting like we are strangers." I held her gaze steadily. Strangers would have treated me with more kindness. The porch fell silent again. Somewhere inside the house, the grandfather clock began striking 8 o'clock. Slow, steady vinyl. Vanessa turned away first. She walked back into the house without another word, heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Daniel remained frozen beside the porch railing watching her disappear into the hallway. And for the first time since Harold died, my son looked afraid of the woman he married. 1 week later, moving trucks lined the curb in front of the house just after sunrise. The morning air carried the sharp scent of wet grass and fresh rain while pale golden light stretched across the neighborhood. I stood quietly near the front window holding a warm cup of coffee as two men loaded suitcases and cardboard boxes into the back of a white truck. Not my boxes this time. Vanessa moved quickly across the driveway wearing oversized sunglasses even though the sun was barely up. Her movements were sharp and angry now, stripped completely of the polished confidence she used to wear so carefully. Daniel looked worse every day. Exhaustion had settled into his face like permanent shadow. He carried boxes silently from the garage to the truck without speaking much to anyone. Every few minutes he glanced back toward the house the way people look at something they already know they have lost. I never raised my voice during any of it. I never demanded revenge. I simply enforced the boundaries Harold spent years protecting for me before he died. Rebecca handled the legal process quietly and efficiently. According to the trust, they were given reasonable notice to vacate the property after their attempt to pressure me into leaving the residence. Vanessa called it unfair. She called it manipulation. Once, late at night, I even overheard her blaming Harold for setting traps. But deep down, all three of us understood the truth. Harold did not set traps. He saw danger coming before I did. Around 9 o'clock, Daniel walked slowly onto the porch while movers secured the last furniture straps inside the truck. The sky had cleared completely, now bright blue spreading over the neighborhood rooftops. He stood beside me for several long seconds before speaking. "Mom, I am sorry." His voice cracked slightly on the final word. I looked at my son carefully, not as the little boy I once carried through fevers and nightmares, not as the man who betrayed me after his father's funeral, but simply as someone who lost himself trying too hard to keep peace with the wrong person. "I know," I said quietly. Tears filled his eyes almost immediately. "Dad warned me sometimes," he admitted softly. "I just did not want to believe him." That hurt more than anything else. Not because Harold was right, but because Daniel knew it too and still stayed silent. Behind us, the front door opened sharply. Vanessa stepped onto the porch one last time, her heels clicking against the wood Harold built with his own hands nearly 20 years earlier. She looked around the property bitterly before turning toward me. "I hope you are happy now." For a moment I studied her face carefully. The anger, the humiliation, the disbelief that control could disappear so quickly. Then I looked past her toward the maple trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. "No," I answered honestly. "I would have been happy if my family had chosen love over entitlement." Vanessa said nothing after that. She turned away, climbed into the passenger seat of the SUV, and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. A few minutes later, both vehicles pulled slowly away from the curb and disappeared down the street. Silence settled over the house again, but this time it felt peaceful instead of lonely. I walked back inside and closed the front door softly behind me. Harold's chair still faced the backyard windows. The grandfather clock still ticked steadily in the hallway. And for the first time since his death, this house finally felt like home again. Sometimes betrayal does not arrive wearing the face of an enemy. Sometimes it sits across from you at the dinner table smiling politely while planning your disappearance. But I learned something through all of this. Age does not make a woman weak. Grief does not erase her worth. And silence, when chosen carefully, can become its own kind of strength. If this story touched you in any way, I would love to hear your thoughts. Tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? And if you have ever experienced betrayal inside your own family, share your story too. Sometimes the people who understand our pain best are strangers who lived through the same heartbreak.